He ordered her to abort. She agreed. He arrived at the clinic full of regret. But she was already leaving. 8 months later, he sees her and realizes the devastating truth. What keeps a man by a woman's side isn't love, it's obligation. That sentence was spoken with the casualness of someone spreading butter on bread. It was a Tuesday night, warm and unremarkable, like most in that silent house, where you could only hear the clink of silverware and the creak of the rocking chair on the porch. Robert's father uttered the judgment between a sip of beer and another bite of steak, without even looking at his son. And it was there, at that table, swallowed by the darkness of the room, that Robert understood, or perhaps only accepted, that he was living a life he never chose. Rose, sitting across from him, didn't even look up. She was used to heavy sentences spoken in a gentle voice. The words didn't wound her as they might have. They hurt, yes, but she had already grown a callous. She just spread butter on her bread, her eyes downcast, and wondered why she kept trying. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment below with your first impressions. Part 1. The space between. They married young. The townspeople said they were in love. Some even bet it would be one of those eternal loves that defy the desert winds. But those who truly knew Robert, and perhaps not even he was on that list, knew he only got married because his father decided it was time. Because Rose was a good girl, from a decent family, with clean hands, and eyes too sweet to say no. The problem was that Rose loved him, truly, not in a dramatic, movie-like way, but in the way one loves just because she didn't know how to live any other way. She loved his silences, his restrained manner, even the flaws everyone else criticized. She believed that in time, his heart would awaken. But time doesn't awaken anything that's locked. Robert, for his part, never knew what to do with Rose's love. He felt it was too much, that it suffocated him. And he also felt guilt, not for not loving her, but because she didn't notice. When Rose would smile and say, "I made you cinnamon coffee, just the way you like it," he would feel a knot in his stomach. He wanted to say thank you, but he couldn't. He wanted to smile, but his mouth felt like stone. His love lived in the past, in a name he kept under his tongue, like a burning secret. He never had the courage to tell Rose, not because she needed to hear it. She knew. Women always know. But she preferred to pretend she didn't. The house they lived in was simple, built with both their father's hands. It had exposed brick walls, smelled of firewood, and had windows that let in the desert wind. But what blew inside wasn't a breeze. It was absence. Rose walked through the house as if dancing alone. She tended the plants in the patio, hung the sheets smelling of soap, and wrote little notes that she hid in his shirt pockets. Silly notes like, "I dreamed about us at the beach today," or, "You smiled in your sleep tonight." He would read them. He would save them. But he never replied. In town, they said he was cold. She would say he was just tired, that someday he would wake up different. But the days passed, and he didn't wake up. One rainy night, everything almost changed. Rose had a high fever. She trembled and sweated, her eyes lost, her body fragile as a wet rag. Robert ran to the town pharmacy, soaked to the bone. He came back with medicine, warm towels, and a desperate silence. He spent the night by her side, changing compresses, adjusting the blanket, murmuring things he didn't even know how to say. When the fever broke, she fell asleep resting on his chest, and he didn't move. He stayed there, staring at the ceiling, with the feeling that something inside him wanted to be born. But it wasn't. The next morning, she woke up and saw him there. She smiled with tenderness, wanting to capture that moment with her eyes. He simply got up and said he had to go to work. It was as if nothing had happened. But something, yes, had happened. Something small, discreet, but real. Still, the distance between them remained. A chasm without a bridge, only with half-hearted gestures on one side and walls on the other. Mantor. Rose started talking less. She stopped writing the little notes. She hid her coffees in her own sips. The silence between them grew until it became a presence. It was no longer something to be avoided. It was what filled the spaces. She would look out the window, watching the tree branches dance in the wind, and she would wonder when she started living like this, when she stopped trying to be happy and started just resisting. Maybe it was on her wedding day. Maybe on the first thank you he didn't say. Maybe it never even began. Robert felt the weight of expectations in his chest, like a sack of sand no one could see. He blamed Rose for being there, for this house, for the role he was playing so poorly. But deep down, he knew the problem wasn't her. It was him. It always had been. It was just easier to blame than to admit it. His father said a real man swallows his pain and moves on. That love is for weak people. And Robert swallowed everything. The tedium, the discomfort, the desire to disappear. He swallowed Rose. One night, he came home later than usual. He had spent hours driving aimlessly, just to avoid having to come back. When he walked in, he found the house dark, with a single lamp on in the corner of the room. Rose was there, sitting on the sofa, with a book on her lap that she wasn't reading. "I thought you weren't coming," she said, without anger, without reproach. "I'm here now," was all he replied, and he sat on the other side of the room. They didn't say anything else. They just stayed there, two silent bodies, breathing slowly, as if the night could heal what love couldn't. Outside, the rain fell lightly. Inside, the emptiness was thick, dense, like a third inhabitant in that house. And that's how their marriage was drawn, not with promises or kisses, but with pauses. Long, painful, deep pauses, without anyone saying it, and perhaps for that very reason, they both knew. Something was about to change. They just didn't know what. Not yet. Part 2. The Last Gesture. That morning, the sky was a blank page, neither blue nor gray, as if the day itself had forgotten to begin. Robert left early, without saying where he was going. Rose listened to the sound of the door closing with that cruel lightness of someone who has already learned to leave on the inside long before their feet walk out. She stayed there, in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a different kind of silence. It was no longer the silence between them. It was the silence within her, as if her body knew before her mind that something had broken, and it wouldn't be fixed. The following days came in fragments. He started coming home later and later. Sometimes, he didn't sleep at home at all. Other times, he would return with the scent of another's skin clinging to his clothes. Rose didn't ask. She had learned that certain answers weren't worth the bitter taste of the question, until the night he didn't hide it. They were having dinner, or trying to. 2 plates served, 2 chairs occupied, and a chasm in the middle. He dropped his fork on the table with a dry clatter and said, "I want a divorce." Rose looked up slowly, not out of surprise, but as someone who finally faces what they've always known. "I never loved you," he continued, without a flicker. "My heart always belonged to someone else." She remained still. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just took a deep breath, trying to keep her body from falling apart. Inside, the floor had given way. But on the outside, she simply got up from the table, took her plate, and carried it to the sink. He watched her, confused by her lack of reaction. He expected a scene. He expected guilt. But all he got was a silence that hurt more than any words. That night, Rose didn't sleep. She sat on the porch with a blanket over her shoulders and her feet cold. She looked at the empty street and wondered how it was possible that, even having foreseen it all, it hurt so much. 2 days later, the dizziness arrived. The nausea, the missed period. She knew. Her body once again had warned her before the test. But she took it anyway, alone. At a pharmacy in the center of town, where no one looked you in the eye and everyone knew too much. Positive. She returned home with the result folded in her coat pocket. She sat on the bed, took a deep breath, and waited for him to arrive. She had to tell him. It was the least she could do. Robert came in as usual, without knocking, without looking. He threw his backpack in a corner and went straight to the bathroom. When he came out, Rose was standing in the center of the room. "I'm pregnant." He froze. His eyes blinked slowly, as if his brain refused to comprehend. "What?" "Pregnant," she repeated, her voice clear. He took a step back, almost laughing with nerves. No, it can't be. You must be wrong." "I'm not." Silence, and then the explosion. "Get rid of it. I'm already out. I'm not staying for a mistake I didn't choose." She didn't move. She didn't widen her eyes in surprise. She didn't beg. She simply replied, "Okay, I'll take care of it." And it was that calm, that lack of a fight, that made him sigh with relief. He thought she had understood, that that was the end of it, that now he could leave with a clear conscience. But what he didn't see, what he never saw, was that behind that calm was something else. There was a plan, or rather, there was something growing inside her, something he would never understand. Part 3. The author of her own story. In the following days, Rose pretended to carry on with her life. She cleaned the house, took short walks on the town's trails, avoided the neighbors. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with pity. She just smiled without showing her teeth. She carried the secret like someone carries a knife in their pocket. Cold, sharp, necessary. Robert started going out even more. And when he was home, he remained silent. He spent more time with his phone than with his eyes on her. And still, Rose watched him. Every gesture, every doubt, every new weariness on his face. One night they sat at the dinner table in silence, as always, but something hung in the air. "Have you talked to a lawyer yet?" she asked without looking at him. "Not yet, but I will," he replied dryly. "When you want me to sign, let me know." He nodded, and she went back to looking at her plate. But she didn't eat. She just played with her food like someone searching for something that was never there. Later, lying in bed, Rose caressed her own belly. Still flat, still invisible. She thought about what would become of that baby. She thought about how to protect something so fragile in a world where no one holds anything with both hands. She still didn't know what she was going to do. She just knew what she wasn't going to do. The next morning, while he was still asleep, she wrote something on the bathroom mirror with lipstick. "I wish you peace, even if it's not with me." And she went for a walk. At the town market, she saw a middle-aged woman with a child in her arms. He was laughing, covered in flour, and hugged his mother with his feet dangling. Rose couldn't look away. She felt like crying, but she didn't. When she returned home, Robert was already gone. In the kitchen, his mug was still on the counter, with the remains of cold coffee. She washed it with slow, almost delicate movements, as if, by cleaning it, she could erase everything that hurt. Later, she sat at the table and began to write. Not letters, not goodbyes. She was writing plans. She was thinking about routes, about names, about what it would be like to run away, not out of fear, but out of love. A love that was now only hers, and that being who was growing, silently, protecting her from within. And that night, as she lay down, she looked at the dark ceiling and whispered, "You don't need anyone else. I have you, and that's enough." On the other side of the city, Robert was drinking, with friends who didn't know him, with women who didn't truly want him. He laughed loudly, as if the world were simple, as if everything were fine. But deep down, there was something strange, an echo, an annoyance, an emptiness that no drink could fill. He didn't know yet that the biggest lie in the whole story was about to begin. And that, for the first time in his life, Rose was not the victim. She's the author. And like any author of a story, she no longer wanted to live. Rose took an invisible pen and began to rewrite her destiny with trembling but firm hands. In the early morning hours, before the first rooster crowed, she left town without a sound. She carried with her a small suitcase, the pregnancy tests hidden among her cotton clothes, and the last photograph of their marriage, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of what would never be again. The bus departed with its headlights tearing through the darkness. Rose didn't look back, not out of strength, but out of weariness. Behind her, she left a house where love had never truly entered. Through the bus's foggy window, she saw the outlines of the hills fading into the mist, as if the world she was leaving behind was slowly being erased. Her destination was a small, isolated village in the New Mexico desert. Mrs. Gomez, her maternal grandmother, lived there, a woman with small eyes and a firm voice who wore every year she had lived as a stamp of wisdom on her face. Rose didn't call ahead. She just showed up. When Mrs. Gomez opened the door, she said nothing. She just looked at her granddaughter, her swollen eyes and the silence clinging to her skin, and she understood everything. She let her in, pointed to the bed in the back room, and went back to sewing as if it were any other day. Because women like her didn't make a fuss. They offered refuge. The first day passed without questions. The second one, too. It was only on the third day, as they sorted corn for the chickens, that her grandmother spoke. "If you're hungry, eat. If you want to cry, cry. But don't live with all that locked inside." Rose bit her lip. She didn't reply. She kept shelling the corn until her fingers burned. It was easier to feel physical pain than to speak. Time in that village had a different rhythm. There was no internet, no rush, no uncomfortable stairs. Just dry land, a heavy wind, and barefoot children running on dirt roads. Rose started dressing like the local women, wide skirts, cotton blouses, and her hair always tied back. It was an attempt to disappear. At the small health clinic, a soft-spoken nurse listened to the baby's heart for the first time. Rose closed her eyes. It was a dull, strong, undeniable drumbeat. She cried in silence, her head resting on the worn bedsheet of the examining table, not out of sadness, but because in that sound there was life, and she needed to start over. The lie came from a nosy neighbor. "You look like you've been a mother before." Rose hesitated, but replied, "I was, but I lost him." The lie hurt, but it also protected. The news spread quickly. Soon everyone believed she was there, recovering from a loss. And yes, she was. Just not the one they thought. In the days that followed, Rose helped her grandmother with sewing, tended the plants, and read books that had been gathering dust on the shelves for years. She wrote letters she never sent, jotted down possible names for the baby, and practiced smiling in front of the mirror. She was relearning how to exist. At night, on the porch, with her feet up on an old cushion, she would listen to her grandmother murmur prayers, and felt that, perhaps for the first time, she was safe. "You don't need to run," Mrs. Gomez said one of those nights, sewing a sky-blue blanket with infinite patience. "But you can't hide forever either." Rose looked down, hugging her still discreet belly. "I'm not hiding. I'm waiting to be strong. Strength isn't something you wait for, Mija. It's something you create." That sentence echoed for days. In the village, she met Letitia, a middle-aged woman with 2 children and a painful past she didn't hide. They became friends of silence, the kind who understand each other with glances and share secrets without naming them. It was Letitia who, one afternoon, asked point blank, "If he changed, would you forgive him?" Rose didn't hesitate. Forgiving isn't the hard part. The hard part is learning to trust again. And that was the point. Trust can't be mended with apologies. It's glass. And broken glass can't be mended with thread. Time went on, as if it were trying to heal. But Rose knew there was no cure. There was only choice. And she chose to move forward. Then came the day she scheduled the appointment. Not because she wanted to, but because she needed to feel that she was in control. That she was the one making the decisions. The day before, she stayed awake, her eyes lost on the ceiling and her hand on her belly. She talked to the baby without words, only with thoughts. It was as if she were saying, "If you're going to be born into a world where no one wants you, it's better that it's not now." But her heart was beating, strongly, insistently, as if it were saying, "I'm here, and I want you." That same night, on the other side of the city, Robert dreamed. In his dream, Rose was leaving a white clinic, her hands stained with blood, her eyes empty. And there was a strange sound, not a scream, not silence. It was a cry, a baby's cry. He woke up drenched in sweat, his chest pounding as if he had run miles, and for the first time, he felt fear. Without thinking, he got in the car. He drove without stopping, as if the wheels knew the way. He arrived at the clinic just as dawn was breaking. The street was empty. A cold wind blew, kicking up dust. And then he saw her. Rose was coming out slowly, her steps heavy, her face downcast, her head low. He ran toward her. "Rose?" She stopped, but she didn't look at him. "It's done. I got rid of it." The sentence was said like a knife, without hesitation, without drama. Just said. He looked at her, his mouth opening and closing without making a sound. "You don't have to worry anymore." And she kept walking. He fell to his knees right there on the dirty sidewalk. The world spun. Everything in him screamed no. But it was too late. Or at least that's what he believed. What he never knew was that she hadn't done anything. She had just decided not to share anything else with someone who never stayed. That lie was the last gesture of love, or perhaps of self-protection, because she knew that, from that moment on, what she carried inside was only hers, and whoever was willing to stay. Part 3. The return of the prodigal son, back at the house after seeing her leave the clinic, or believing she left with an empty womb and a shattered soul. Robert carried a weight he couldn't immediately name. For the first few days, he tried to act as if nothing had happened. He talked to friends, laughed at the same jokes, went out drinking. But there was something different about everything. A dull sound behind the music, a lack of flavor in the drinks, an inability to laugh that he couldn't explain. The house, once silent, now screamed. The objects were not just there, they judged him. The teapot, the old curtain she washed every week, the blue blanket folded on the sofa. Everything was a memory of what he never knew how to value. Robert walked through the rooms like someone walking through ruins, and no matter how much he tried to convince himself that he was free now, something inside him knew he had lost something bigger than any freedom. He started avoiding the mirror. His own eyes accused him. There was something he didn't recognize, unease. One night, as he opened the nightstand drawer looking for a sleeping pill, He found the little notes, the ones Rose used to leave in his pockets, among his clothes, or taped to his notebooks. He had read them at the time, yes, but he never gave them any importance. Now, each sentence was a dagger. You smiled in your sleep last night. I watched you for hours. You looked happy. I made you cinnamon coffee. I know you prefer it strong, but today I felt like you needed something sweet. And then, at the bottom of the drawer, folded into quarters, like someone hiding a piece of their soul, was the final note. If you ever truly love me, I hope there's still time. He read it aloud. Once, twice, 3 times. And then he broke. It wasn't a pretty cry. It was a collapse. His body curled up on the floor, his sobs muffled, his hands shaking, his throat burning. He cried like someone who never learned how, like someone who had always suppressed everything and could no longer. That night, he understood, truly, what he had done. It wasn't just about asking for a divorce. It wasn't just about the rejected pregnancy. It was about all the days she tried, all the days she insisted. And he walked away. The regret didn't arrive as a thought. It arrived as a presence, a weight on the back of his neck, an echo in the walls, a voice that repeated, "She stayed, and you left." His friends disappeared, not out of malice, but because they didn't know how to deal with who he had become. Robert was no longer the same. He didn't drink as much. He didn't laugh the same way. He had a lost look, always searching for something no one could give back. One day, he went to the park where he used to walk with Rose. He sat on her favorite bench, the one under the big tree with the rusty leaves. He stayed there for hours, watching people pass by. A young couple walked by, pushing a stroller, and he didn't look away. He thought, that could have been me. But it wasn't. He went back home and looked at old photos. In a dusty album, an image of the two of them dancing at a wedding. Rose was smiling with her eyes. He was just there. Nothing more. For the first time, he noticed how he never truly smiled in photos with her. He sat on the living room floor, surrounded by albums, notes, and memories he had once ignored. And he had clarity. A clarity that hurt. He had lost her before he even realized he had her. In the following days, he tried to call her. The number no longer worked. He called Rose's mother, who hung up without a word. He sent messages and none were answered. He went to her parents' house. No one answered. He learned they had sold it and moved. Rose was now in absence. Robert immersed himself in trying to fake normalcy. He took a job at a mechanic shop. He spent his days in oil and grease, trying to get his hands dirty so his soul wouldn't get dirtier. At night, he slept on the sofa, not for comfort, but as a punishment. The dreams of Rose intensified. Sometimes she looked at him in silence. Other times, she spoke with her eyes full of tears. And in some, she would hand him a baby and then take it away before he could hold it. Loneliness became a habit. But not the kind you choose, but the kind that is imposed on you. One afternoon, coming home from work, he found a letter at the door. No return address, no sender, just his name, written in that handwriting he knew so well. He opened it with trembling hands, but it was an old note, one she must have left by mistake in a notebook he threw away, and that someone, by chance, returned. I saw you sleeping last night. You were dreaming. Were your lips moving? Saying my name? I want to believe you were. He broke again. The next day, he decided to clean the house, as if he wanted to remove the smell of omission, the trace of cowardice. He threw away what he didn't need. He put the notes in a box, sealed it, and hid it. But he couldn't get rid of anything that was hers. Even the scent of her shampoo was still on the pillow. And sometimes, He would rest his face there, like someone looking for a safe place. The regret now was a body inside him. It took up space. It spoke. It prevented him from smiling. There wasn't a single gesture of the day that didn't bring up a memory of Rose. And the cruelest part was knowing he couldn't go back. Because she was no longer where he left her. And more than that, maybe she wasn't waiting for him anymore. Robert, then, began to write. Not letters, because he didn't know where to send them, but loose texts, outpourings, like this one. Today I saw a woman with a child in her arms. They were laughing. I thought, that could have been you. That could have been us. But it's not. I killed that possibility, and I'm still alive. That's the worst part. He wrote without stopping. Sometimes he read aloud, to no one. Other times, he would tear up the pages immediately, as if, by writing, he were trying to exorcise a ghost he himself had created. One night, he went out on foot, with no destination. He walked down unknown streets, crossed bridges, went down avenues. He only stopped when his body could no longer go on. He sat on a curb and cried again. No matter how many times he had done it, it always felt like the first. And it was there, with his face in his hands, that he finally understood. It wasn't just about Rose. It was about him. The man who didn't know how to love. The boy who grew up hearing that feeling was a weakness. The husband who didn't learn how to stay. And now, there was nowhere to hide. That morning, upon returning home, he made a decision to start over. Not for her, not out of regret, but because he needed to rebuild himself from the inside out. But the emptiness, that wouldn't go away. Because when someone leaves, leaving love and silence in the same place, there is no cure. There is only coexistence. And that was what Robert was learning. To coexist with a love that came too late. Time had that cruel habit of teaching lessons when there were no more exams to take. Part 4. The path back in the months that followed, Robert changed. Not like someone seeking redemption, but like someone who finally understands what they've lost. His routine became quieter, more contained. There was no longer any rush or distraction. The workshop was the only place where his mind calmed down, hammering, tightening screws, fixing what was broken. It was ironic. He could fix anything but his life. One afternoon, with the sky a sad blue and the busy streets of Phoenix pulsing around him, Robert walked aimlessly. He had left work early, taken a different route, and ended up in a town square whose name he didn't know. There was an old fountain, stone benches, ice cream vendors, and families spread out on the dry grass. A common place. But that day, it was where everything stopped. He saw her. Across the street. Rose. She wore a loose blouse, but not loose enough to hide the belly she held with both delicacy and firmness. She walked slowly, one hand on her back, the other on her stomach. She wore a simple dress and flat sandals, and her hair was tied back in a way he had never seen before. But it was her. The city kept going. People walked by, cars honked, children laughed. But for Robert, everything fell silent. The world lost its sound. Only that image existed. The woman he thought he had lost forever. And more than that, the truth she had never told him. The baby. He took a step, then another. And he stopped. The impact was stronger than the impulse. It wasn't just surprise. It was a pang in his chest, and a regret that now had flesh, form, and movement. He felt his legs falter. He gasped for air, his eyes filled with tears. And then he sat down on the curb, not even noticing, his head bowed, his elbows on his knees. There, between the noise of the city and the internal silence, he murmured, "She lied. She didn't have an abortion. She protected me, even from that." And he cried. Again. But differently. Because now there was something more than guilt. There was hope. Rose crossed the square without seeing him. She went into a bakery. She bought bread. She talked to the saleswoman, smiled slightly, and she left. When she walked by again, he didn't move. He just watched her. She seemed tired, but whole. There was a fierce calm in her posture, like someone who fell, but chose to get back up. That night, Robert didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared out the window, his eyes fixed on the darkness. And at some point, his mind created an image. Him, with the baby in his arms. The child looked at him with deep eyes, like hers. And in the dream, he said, "I'm sorry. Not for before, but for not being better." He woke up in a sweat, but with clarity, like someone who has received a mission. He needed to see her, for real. Not just find her on the street, like a spectator. He needed to be in front of her, look her in the eyes, and say everything that was stuck inside him. Even if she didn't forgive him, even if she didn't want to listen. He knew he couldn't show up empty-handed, or with cheap words. The next morning, he asked for 2 days off. He told his boss he had to resolve something personal. He took a bus toward New Mexico. He didn't know if she was still there, but it was the only lead he had. The road to the village seemed longer than it was. Every curve was a memory. Every stop, a hypothesis of what he would say. He arrived at dusk, with the sun hiding behind the desert mountains. The village was still simple, silent, like a place that keeps everyone's secrets. He asked for Mrs. Gomez. A child pointed to the house with the weathered roof. Robert stopped in front of the wooden gate. His heart pounded against his chest. He took a deep breath. He knocked, and he waited. The gate creaked before opening completely. It wasn't Rose who answered. It was Mrs. Gomez. Her eyes, small and sharp, scanned Robert from head to toe, like someone examining a wounded animal that has returned to the wilderness where it was born. She said nothing at first. She just opened the door a little wider. "Come in," he obeyed. With slow steps, he crossed the packed dirt patio, where flowers grew in a wild but alive way. There was the smell of earth, of freshly made tortillas, and a thick silence. "Rose doesn't want you here," she said, already in the kitchen, stirring something over the fire. Robert stood still, his hands trembling and his throat dry. "I know, but still, I had to come." Mrs. Gomez didn't turn around. "Why?" "Because now I understand. And I didn't come to promise anything. I just want to be here. Do whatever she allows." The old woman let out a sigh that sounded more like a tired whisper. "You want to change?" He nodded, his eyes downcast. Then she put the wooden spoon on the counter, turned around, crossed her arms, and looked him in the face with the hardness of someone who has seen too many men promise what they never deliver. "Then stay. But no romance, no promises, just presence." The words seared him. She doesn't need a man. She needs help, and the baby needs a father. Those words hit him like a brand, a calling, a sentence. That same night, Mrs. Gomez prepared the back room. It was narrow, with a single bed and a closet that smelled of old wood. But it was a beginning, and he accepted it with humility. The next day, at 6 in the morning, he heard footsteps in the kitchen. He got up before the sun warmed the tiles and went there. Rose was standing with her back to him, stirring a pot with an apron stained with flour. She didn't say, "Good morning." She didn't turn around. She just spoke, dryly. "You don't have to pretend everything is okay." I didn't come to pretend anything, he replied in a low voice. She kept stirring the pot. How long are you going to stay? As long as you let me. She stopped. She took a deep breath. Then she went back to stirring. She didn't say anything else, and so it went for days. A silent, tense, but respectful coexistence. Robert started helping with the small things. First, cleaning the patio. Then, going to the market, carrying the bags. He took care of the chicken coop, changed the water for the plants, prepared buckets of warm water when Rose's back hurt. He learned to make cinnamon tea the way Mrs. Gomez taught him. He watched in silence. He paid attention. One day, he saw Rose trying to reach something on a high shelf. She stretched her arms, huffed, and kept trying. He approached slowly. Can I? She hesitated, and for the first time, she looked him in the eyes. Only if you ask permission. He took a deep breath. Can I help you, Rose? She looked away, and slowly she took a step to the side. It was just a jar of flour. But for him, it was a world. Time passed. The days were long, but something was changing, even though no one named it. One hot afternoon, while Mrs. Gomez was taking a nap in the hammock and Rose was resting with her feet on a stool, Robert was fighting with the patio spigot. The water pressure was low, and it was splashing everywhere, and he was muttering curses. Damn it! All that's missing is for this thing to explode now! Rose heard him, and for the first time she let out a laugh. Brief, but real. He turned, surprised, and she looked away, like someone who has been caught by an affection she didn't want to admit. What was that? He risked asking. Nothing. It's just, you haven't changed that much. He smiled, not knowing if that was a good thing or a bad thing. But it was a sign. In her room, on top of the wooden crib, there was a teddy bear. The same one from the beginning of their marriage, which he had once brought her without thinking, in a gesture that was too small for what was missing between them. Now, that little bear was there, a witness to a time that no longer existed. One day, while Rose was folding the baby's clothes, he came in slowly. Can I? She didn't reply, but she didn't send him away either. He approached the crib. He carefully touched the little bear. Then, he looked at her. I wish I could go back, do everything differently. She stopped. She looked at him. There were tears in her eyes, but also firmness. But you can't. I know, and it doesn't do any good for you to tell me you've changed. I don't want to hear it. I need to see it, to feel it. He nodded. That's what I'm trying to do. The silence between them was no longer a chasm. It was a bridge under construction. Slow, unsure, but real. The weeks passed. Robert was still there. Present, silent, firm. And Rose, little by little, began to breathe differently. Still with fear. Still with reservations. But something in her was also changing. Because love, sometimes, doesn't come back. It is reborn. From scratch. In a different way. And no one there was in a hurry. Because when pieces are glued back together carefully, they form something stronger than before, even if they are never the same. Part 5. A new kind of family. In that early morning, time seemed to go off kilter. The house was dark, and the whole world was sleeping, except for her. Rose's cry was dry, intense, and it went through the walls like a muffled thunder. Robert, who had been sleeping lightly since he moved into the small back room, jumped out of bed as if he were under attack. He didn't even put on his shoes. He ran through the house, his eyes burning and his heart out of rhythm. He found her hunched over in the hallway, holding her belly with both hands, soaked in a cold sweat. "Rose," he cried, approaching. "It's coming. Now," she muttered between her teeth, her voice ragged with pain. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the keys, opened the front gate, and started the car with the headlights still off. Mrs. Gomez was already standing too, as if she had known beforehand. She just handed him the hospital bag, without a word. Robert ran back to Rose and helped her into the car. No one said anything. The road to the hospital was like crossing a minefield. Potholes, stones, curves, and in the passenger seat was the woman he had once sworn not to love, and who was now the only person he wanted to see breathe. "Breathe with me, Rose. Come on, breathe deep. I know what I have to do," she said through clenched teeth. "Just drive." And he drove, with the care of someone carrying something sacred. At the hospital, the hallway smelled of disinfectant and urgency. Doctors ran back and forth, and he felt his legs giving way as they put her in a wheelchair. "Are you the father?" they asked. He hesitated for a second, but not to think, only to let the weight of the word settle in. "Yes, I am." He was allowed to enter. He stayed by her side, holding her hand tightly. She, between contractions, squeezed with such intensity that his fingers throbbed. But he didn't let go. "Rose," he murmured. She didn't answer, but she didn't let go either. The hours felt like weeks. The labor was long and difficult. But at one point, the sound that filled that room wasn't a scream of pain. It was a small, new cry, a sharp, cutting cry, the kind of sound that is only born once and changes everything. Robert felt his legs wouldn't hold him. He had to lean against the wall. The tears came before he could stop them. It's a girl," the excited nurse said, handing him the clean, swaddled baby. Rose slowly turned her face, exhausted, spent, but alive, and she saw him receive their daughter into his arms. Robert held her like someone holding fire, but also hope. His eyes wide, his hands trembling. She was so small, so light, so real. "Hello, little one." "Hello," he whispered, his voice cracking. He looked at Rose. Her eyes were full of tears. No makeup, no armor. Just her, human, whole, strong. She gave a slight nod of her head, like someone who allows, like someone who recognizes something. And he understood. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A step. In the days that followed, the house changed. The silence gave way to cries, hurried footsteps, boiling water, bottles, warm cloths. Rose breastfed with attentive eyes, and Robert offered to hold the baby after each feeding. He learned to change diapers, to heat the water to the right temperature, to calm her crying with soft music. Mrs. Gomez watched from a distance. She didn't say much, but her gaze held a contained peace, like someone watching a barren field begin to bloom. One afternoon, she was sitting with the baby in her arms, cradling her with care. The sun coming in through the window gilded her white hair. Robert and Rose were in the kitchen, separated by the table, exchanging brief glances, trying to decipher the new language being born between them. Mrs. Gomez called them with a gesture. They approached. "Now she's yours," she said, without mincing words, looking at the sleeping girl in her lap. "What I could do, I've already done. A house, a lie, and love from both sides." She handed the baby to Rose with delicacy, like someone returning a miracle. Rose held her in her arms with an almost shy affection. She looked at Robert. He said nothing. He just looked at her. In the eyes. "I still don't forgive you," Rose said, her voice firm but broken. "I don't expect that, but I think I want to." That sentence, spoken with eyes full of fear, but also tenderness, was the beginning of everything that could still blow. He smiled. "That's fine. While I wait, I'll take care of you." And she believed him. Because there's a difference between someone who comes back and someone who stays. And he was there, without promises, without speeches, just with presence. And in that moment, even though no wounds were completely closed, they were a family. Not perfect, but possible. Time passed with slow steps, as if it knew that hurry doesn't go with rebuilding. The days in that house were no longer made of sharp silences, but of new sounds. The noise of tiny footsteps in the hallway, the shy laughter of a little girl who was beginning to explore the world, and the soft conversations between two people who, at last, were learning to listen to each other. Robert woke up early. The sun was barely stretching over the rooftops when he was already dressed, his hands rough, and the lunch Rose had prepared for him ready. The construction site was a half-hour walk away. It was hard work, but it was honest. And for him, more than that, it was the opportunity to build something solid, both on the outside and on the inside. He would return in the afternoon, his body covered in dust and his face tanned by the sun. But when he crossed the wooden gate, he would always find the same scene. Rose sitting on the porch, with the little girl on her lap or at her feet, playing with scraps of fabric, dried leaves, and inventing stories for every new sound she learned to make. "The bath is ready," Rose would say, without looking at him, as he took off his dirty boots. It was routine, but it wasn't automatic. It was care. A care that had been born slowly, like everything else that needed to be reborn. After his bath, they would have tea. The cinnamon kind, with more sugar than he liked, but which she said helped to relax. It was in those moments that they would look each other in the eye. They didn't talk about the past. There was no need to. What was important was what they were building. The baby, now with teeth on the way and wobbly steps, had become the center of their universe. Every new syllable, every attempt to say mommy or daddy was celebrated with a contained joy, as if they were afraid destiny would hear them and come to collect. Rose smiled more, and it was a different smile from the one he remembered. Before, she smiled with hope. Now, she did it with presence. A smile from someone who no longer expects anything, but just lives. Robert, seeing her like that, felt a silent gratitude. Not for having been forgiven, but for having been allowed, for having been received, even without the whole story breaking down. For her choosing to stay, even though she didn't have to. On Sundays, they were the favorite days in that house. They would wake up without a rush. Mrs. Gomez would make bread in the wood-fired oven, and after lunch, she would tell stories of when she was young. The little girl would listen, not understanding much, but always clapping at the end. And everyone would laugh. Rose, sometimes, would look at Robert and see a different man. One she hadn't known before, someone who no longer asked for forgiveness with words but with actions, who came home exhausted but still found the strength to tell a story or fix the faucet that had been dripping for days. She no longer said she forgave him, but every night, as she lay next to him, she would rest her head on his chest, and that was enough. It was on one of those nights, with the little girl asleep on his lap and the warm breeze brushing the porch, that it happened. Robert knelt down, not in a hurry or in fear, but with a serenity that Rose had not yet seen in him. He took a small cardboard box from his pocket. Inside, a simple ring. No stones, no sparkle, but clean, chosen with care, paid for with days of work and nights of saving. Rose, I was an idiot. I loved you from the beginning, but I was too foolish to realize it. His voice was firm, but his gaze was trembling. She looked at him without saying anything. The little girl was still asleep, breathing softly, as if everything in the world was in its place. "You are my home, my courage. Will you marry me? Again? This time, for love." Only for love. Time stood still. Rose looked at the little girl, then at him. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overflowing emotion. She took a moment to respond, because she knew what that yes meant. It was a new beginning, not to forget the past, but to look at it as someone who remembers the path that led them here. Yes, now yes. Robert closed his eyes for an instant, like someone breathing a sigh of relief, like someone who finds shelter. At the back of the patio, in the shadows of the plants, Mrs. Gomez watched. She didn't approach. She just smiled. A quiet smile, from someone who understands that some harvests take time. But they bloom. Now, a real family, she murmured, going back inside with a light heart. On the porch, the moon seemed to hear everything. And there, under a sky full of invisible witnesses, 3 lives intertwined, not with promises, but with gestures, with the weight of all that was and the lightness of all that could still be. Love now was not a utopia. It was a daily reality. True love doesn't always begin with promises. Sometimes it begins with falls, with silence, with wounds no one sees, but also with choices, with someone who, even after everything, decides to stay. Because to love is not to say. It is to care. It is to listen. It is to return, and to deserve to stay. And sometimes what begins with pain ends with a baby sleeping in your arms, and a heart that at last understands what it means to truly love. If you felt this story to the very end, tell me you were here with me. Write in the comments, I stayed. Because those who stay to the end understand the value of a new beginning.